My name is Brandon. I'm a former police sergeant and assistant SWAT team leader. Today, my mission continues with a remarkable organization called Here Tomorrow, whose mission is the removal of all barriers to mental health support in order to save lives. Welcome to our podcast, Clearing the Minefield. The men and women in uniform who will be our guests have made extraordinary sacrifices in service to their people. Now, with strength and resilience, they live their lives on the road to wellness. We ask you to understand that some of the raw and real experiences they'll be sharing may be unsettling to some viewers. Now walk with me, friend, as we clear the minefield. Hey guys, welcome back to Clearing the Minefield. Today's guest is the broken responder, Richard Burns. I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a moment. I want to tell you guys real quick again about Sweeney Plumbing and Remodeling. Phenomenal family. I've known them since they were kids. I've been through the ringer with them, and they have built their entire business on faith, family, and service. They do a lot to support our military and first responders in this podcast and via other ways. Always about service. Sweeney Plumbing and Remodeling can take care of anything you need. Again, I'm welcoming the broken responder. If you don't follow him on TikTok, go do it. That's how I found him, and I love the content, doing a lot of good stuff. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, good morning. Well, actually, I guess good afternoon in Florida. It's good morning,
Yeah.
Colorado.
There you go, man. I think I told you this before, but even like when I was teaching Krav Maga and reality-based training, for some reason, Colorado just kept pulling me in. I just kept going back to Colorado, which is not a complaint.
Yeah, right. Colorado.
Beautiful
We
state.
are an interesting state for sure.
True enough.
It's different. It's changed so much in the time that I started working here and to what it is now. It's so different.
It is. It's when I was first out there, we didn't have anything like a medical marijuana program in Florida at the time.
Yeah.
I think Colorado was one of the first.
I
And
think I know we started rec weed when, gosh, I think I just started to get off of active duty in 2012 or 2013, because I think Colorado and Washington were the first states to pass rec. And then I think shortly after it, or right about the same time, we went medical. And I mean, at first, it created a crazy influx of
Mhm.
people, but now it's just kind of equaled out with everybody doing the same thing.
I bet. And I kept saying this is going to be, all of this. I mean, only until it catches on, and then it's going to calm down. Yeah.
Right.
But
I mean,
yeah,
just
it was an interesting time.
right. Legalize it all the way across the board, tax it like they do cigarettes, and just,
There we go.
yeah.
Richard, brother, let's get into it. Tell me a little
Yeah.
bit, if you will, about where you're from, where you grew up.
So I am a small town Midwest kid. I grew up actually born in McCook, Nebraska, out on the western half of Nebraska, southwest part of the state. Uh, and then my parents moved to Kearney, which is basically smack dab in the middle of Nebraska. If you ever go through Nebraska on Interstate 80 and you see this big, god awful, like, arch over the interstate, that's where I grew up. That's my hometown. It's a small town of like 30,000 people. I mean, I think, grown since I've left. But yeah, I grew up as a small town kid. I think one of the funniest things I always hated hearing on the street is, you're a cop and, uh, you grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth. And I absolutely was not. I was a poor kid. We grew up on commodities and the old tear out food stamps. Um, I mean, I watched a time, I remember, I think I was in probably fourth grade. So we're like Desert Storm. So 1988, 89, like my parents I mean, it's tough. They were arguing over $20 to go get me a pair of shoes at Payless Shoe Source. I mean, that's how tough it was for us at that time. And then things kind of started getting better. My parents ended up, I think I was probably, I don't know, 90, 91, fifth or sixth grade when my parents separated, got divorced. Um, I grew up in a cult with the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I am not a huge fan of religion by any means, but as we get into it, I'll kind of get back to how I found God again with this whole process. But yeah, so when my parents divorced, my mom up and moved to California. She took my little brother and sister. I stayed in Nebraska with my dad, went to high school, and my dad wanted me to go to a trade school. Like, he was pushing the trade schools hard when I was getting ready to graduate high school, and I just wasn't ready for it. I didn't want to go back to school again. And so I started talking to all the recruiters for the military, and I sat down and talked to the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and I really ticked my dad off because he was a two-time Navy vet. Well, he did two tours in Vietnam, and so he wasn't super hip on me joining the military. And then I think I was 17 when I talked to all the recruiters, and for the longest time I was going to talk to the join the Army. That's what I was going to do. And just so happened, damn Marine recruiters are cocky as hell, and they will always get you.
Those uniforms look good, man.
Right? So the recruiter's walking through the hallway there at high school one day, and like we hadn't had an appointment yet to talk to the Marine Corps recruiter, and he looked at me and he's like, "Hey, shithead, when are you going to come into my office?" And I was like, "This dude can't talk to me like that. Like, I'm a kid. Who are you to talk to me like that?" And I was like, "Well, what are you doing after school?" And he's like, "I'll be in my office waiting on you." And I was like, "Oh, snap." So I went in, sat down with the Marine Corps recruiter, and that was it. I was joining the Marine Corps. And so I had to go explain that to my dad because I had to have him sign for me. And it was one of those that, yeah, my dad always had coffee every day with a bunch of his old crusty Vietnam vet buddies. And
Yeah.
like, one morning he was like, "You're going with me." And I said, "Why am I? This is your time." He's like, "You are going with me because you're going to explain to everybody why you want to join the Marine Corps. You can convince all my crusty Vietnam vet buddies why you want to join, then I'll sign." And God, it was one of the most nerve-wracking things at 17. I mean, I grew up with these guys, around these guys, known these guys for years, but then you get into that aspect of like trying to be a man and explain why you want to do that. So for me, it was kind of cool. I joined at 17, shipped out halfway through, my senior year, graduated. Actually, I graduated early, and then I actually missed my high school graduation because I was in training for the Marine Corps, and
Hmm.
then just kind of took off with it and enjoyed it. But then things happened, and ended up getting out in '03. Went back home to my town in Nebraska and became a police officer there. And it was just one of those things that I kind of stumbled into being a cop because it was a opening. It was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, this is kind of cool, let me try this." And I had no idea what I was getting into. I mean, at first, I look at it, it was a great learning experience for law enforcement wise, because my hometown is not a violent town. It's like you may have a homicide once a decade, if that. That's I mean, they have property crime. That's about it, and some theft and assaults, but no serious homicide. So my entire time was, like running traffic, learning things, and answering, DVs, stuff like that. Nebraska is very interesting because it revolves around college football. That whole state revolves around how Nebraska does on a Saturday. And it's kind of funny because, when I grew up, Nebraska was just beating the snot out of everybody in the 90s. There's those first couple of times, like Miami and Florida State, those guys in the early 90s were just awesome programs. And,
Yeah.
when I was older, in a cop, it was if Nebraska, won the game, man, you had happy drunks you were dealing with, but if Nebraska lost, dude, our DVs would go through the roof because you get a bunch of drunk, crazy, angry fans. And, the wife popped off and said something. One of the craziest DVs I ever had popped off because Nebraska lost. And it just so happened and it's like at a trailer park. Like, you can't get any better than this. So it's at a trailer park. The wife comes home after her shift at Papa Murphy's Pizza. She's had a rough day. The husband's mad because the Huskers lost, and he says something, and he's like, "Well, can you throw me a Coke?" And she took that shit literally and like threw a 12-ounce Coke can at this dude. And then
As one does.
they're running around the living room chasing each other. Well, she goes into the bathroom and hides. So he, sits back down. He's calmed down, drinking his shaken up Coke. She comes out of the bathroom with the blow dryer, and you know how it's got the crosshairs on the blow dryer? She smashed him in the head so hard with the blow dryer that she left the little crosshatch from the back of the blow dryer in like a cut in this dude's head. And then like she chases him, or he chases her outside. She gets in her car, and then he jumps on her car, and then she proceeds to hit him like twice with her car, and then hit his truck. Like, I can't make this shit up. Like, it's
Well,
just,
it sounds like a pretty nice American relationship.
yeah,
That's really
it's a normal day on a Husker weekend. But enough about that, But I went back into the military, um, went back in the Navy, because I was trying to figure out, had I made the right decision in getting out initially? Well, let me go back in there. One of the reasons I kind of left Nebraska. In 2005, my father passed away.
Hmm.
Um, it was kind of a quick deal, really messed with me, um, because of it just kind of happened quick. It was like Christmas '04. I was out in California for my mom's nursing school graduation, get a frantic phone call. My dad had like got sick, they ended up taking him to the hospital. Well, by the time I get through to him, he's in Omaha at I think Bryan, one of the Bryan LG or Bryan LGH or Lincoln, one of those, but he has full blown cancer.
Oh my God.
By the time they found it, it was everywhere. It was in his liver, kidney, spine, lungs, brain. I mean, it riddled him. Unfortunately, uh, he had been battling tumors for, I don't know, pretty much my entire, adolescent life because of, he was 2 times in Vietnam. He was a CB and got exposed to Agent Orange a bunch of times for the foliage stuff. So he ended up passing away, and dude, that was the roughest time of my life because my dad passed away kind of unexpected. There wasn't a plan, and he had a girlfriend, and it just was a mess. We lost everything that my dad had. I mean, I made it out with his ashes, and that was about it. So
Wow.
that was a rough time. There was some family stuff there that happened. There's some lines that were drawn in the sand, and there was some family loyalty that was tested. And there are some folks in family that I just don't talk to anymore because of that and the way that things happened. And
Well, I'll
I'm
say
perfect.
too, though, I think that's fair. To be able to set those boundaries is important.
Yeah, you know,
If you got something that's negatively impacting you like that, so it's
yeah. I
great.
mean, and it was one of those things that, my dad had always, dude, my dad beat it into us. I mean, literally that, because I was the oldest out of, my dad had 5 kids total. He was married once before. I have 2 older sisters, and then, my mom. So out of the second marriage, I'm the oldest. I have a little brother and a little sister. And my dad, you always have to take care of your little siblings, protect your siblings, family, family. Um, and, when my dad died, it was basically my older sister and I fighting everybody. And we did what we did and called the losses where we could. And yeah, I mean, it was funny. It's 21 years now, actually, at the end of February, that my dad's been gone this year. And, for after my dad died, it screwed me up so bad. Like, I never got a chance to grieve the loss of my dad. I was instantly fighting and going back and forth with family. Um, and it honestly, I don't think I healed until, God, I would say just last month. My aunt, who lives in Lincoln still, my dad's younger sister, man, it was one of those days we were just talking about some stuff with my dad and the funeral and, memories that had popped back up. And dude, I think I had the best healing, like
Mm.
rage text session with my aunt. And in like an hour, I think I solved like 20 years of trauma in just an hour going back and
Wow.
forth texting with her. And there was some things that information she had that, kind of plugged some things in for me and, did some things to, I guess, complete some memories for me. And some stuff that, she knew about my dad that hadn't been shared with me until now. And it was one of those things that it just helped. It was so good to finally be over that kind of, and learn to move on finally and forget that stuff. Or not forget it, I guess, heal from it with the things that I was truly bothered by. Um, and then from there, I ended up leaving the Kearney Police Department, joined in the Navy. The Marine Corps at the time had like a 2-year wait
Mm.
when I was trying to go back in, and I think at the end of '07, and so I ended up joining the Navy. And dude, the Navy was so much fun. I mean, it's crazy because I never spent any time on a ship. I
Okay.
literally was either, forward deployed with guys, or we were like, I spent time in Bahrain. It's actually kind of cool. Unfortunately, they just got, a missile strike.
They did.
But it was amazing. I got some cool deployments. Dude, I did a 6-month deployment in Dubai. We were living in 5-star hotels, guarding a Navy base there. It was amazing. 6-month deployment to Rota, Spain, garden stuff, doing forward deployed stuff from there. Awesome. Can't complain about any of that stuff. 2012 comes around and ended up the mandatory force reduction that they started. My wife and I literally had 14 years. My wife wanted to either go to Spain or
Mhm.
Italy. And we were like, cool. So trying to get orders and called, and they're like, your time's done. Mandatory force reduction. We're reducing the forces. And pretty much a bunch of people that were getting ready to re-enlist got, separated. So
Okay.
we start making plans. And ends up my last deployment is to Rota, Spain. Thankfully, they let me come back and test for my department that I'm now medically retired from, and for the Pueblo Police Department. Um, Came back, uh, and when I took the test, it was crazy because, I mean, I live in a town, worked in a town of maybe 120,000 people. But the amount of people that showed up to test when I applied in
Mm.
2011 I mean, there were hundreds of us that showed up for the test.
Okay.
And thankfully, I think I was in a 2 or 3 way tie in that top 10. So we got an interview. The city, I think at the time, had a financial deal. There was a hiring freeze. So it ended up, even though I got out in the end of 2012, I didn't get hired on with my department until the beginning of, I think, February of 2014. Um, so it was interesting going, from my original department of, I thought I knew what a cop was,
Mm. Right.
and then I get to a totally different town of, now we are the most violent town per capita in Colorado.
Right.
So I go from, my first night on the street, uh my
Let me
very
pause. Let me ask you real quick if I can. I want
yeah.
to. You've. This is extraordinary, man. You went from the Marine Corps to law enforcement,
Hmm.
back into the Navy, and
Hmm.
your father's died during this period. You're dealing with that grief, and now you hit the most violent town in Colorado. It's. I can't imagine that you're okay when you hit the streets in Colorado. Do you feel like you're okay at that point?
Oh yeah, I'm okay. It was such an eye opener for me though, because like, you think if you're a cop, you're like, I've seen it all, and then you get into, like, I came here and I thought I understood, how, things were. And it was an eye opener because my very first call on the street, my very first night, I remember it. Uh, I was working 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. And our first call was a home invasion. And they literally said the homeowner was holding the suspect at gunpoint. And, we roll up to the neighborhood, get it surround, the house surrounded, everything. And you look it through the window and you're like, holy crap, he literally does have him at gunpoint. And I'm like, I've never seen this. I've never encountered this because I come from, a mom and pop town where there's really no violent crime like that. You don't have home invasions. And it was crazy because even though we had people there, this dude that was being held at gunpoint escaped the house, hopped the back fence over a cruiser, and like ran another block before we caught this guy. Uh, and then, I'd never worked a homicide before. We had like 5 homicides in my PTO program during the summertime. I mean, it was, the serious assaults. I mean, I think even just the last couple years right before I retired, I mean, Pueblo made top 10 in the nation for most violent cities. So for me, it was an eye opener just how um, different, different communities and cultures are. And when they, talk about the, national mandated policing model, I'm like, you guys never do that because of the different populations and everything. And I mean, the terminology that's used here isn't like, street terminology that's used in Florida or Missouri or Nebraska. Um, so it was an eye opener for me. I learned so much so quick. It was like drinking from a fire hose. Um, and then I started off my career kind of, at first I really liked running traffic. Loved traffic, doing traffic, working accidents. I started going, I'm, qualified all the way up to level 3 accident reconstructionist. Uh, God, that class is so much math,
Oh, I
math and
bet.
physics. I mean, it's absolutely brutal. But I completed that and was working in our traffic section. Uh, Ended up transferring into traffic, and I was what they called an overnight DUI crash car. So I would do from I worked 10, well, actually, I worked 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. So from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., all we were doing was, running traffic and doing crashes. So, there was 2 of us for a town of 120,000 people. So my partner and I, we would just send patrol cars. Hey, go to this crash, gather their information, get a story for me, hang tight. I'll be there in like 10 minutes as soon as I finish up this crash. So from, till 10 o'clock, we did that stuff. And then from 10 to 3, man, I was hunting DUIs.
Okay.
I was, going after trying to find that stuff, street racers, whatever we could do to keep ourselves busy. And then if, there wasn't a bunch of traffic, we'd go roll with patrol and, help them out on some serious calls and just had a blast with it. Um, but then, I mean, hindsight being 2020, to all this stuff, I didn't realize just how bad it was starting to destroy my mental health. Because, dealing with drunks every day, telling them how much they hate you and you're a piece of shit and, all these other things just eventually get to you. And I became an asshole to
Mm,
everybody,
okay.
especially the people I was arresting. They would, you're mean. I didn't make you drive. You made this choice.
Right.
It's frustrating, and people tell you, "Oh, don't let it bother you." Well, it does. Every day it
Of
does.
course.
People tell you how much they hate you. They wish you were dead because you're a piece of crap because you arrested them for their stupidity,
Yep.
driving drunk or doing something else. And uh eventually I had I had a deal happen. Um, I ended up getting kicked out of our traffic section um, because of an issue that I had. Uh, God, probably in what was it, 2018? My mother, who was a registered nurse living in California, I didn't realize how much she was really struggling with addiction and alcoholism. She was suicidal. She was having a bunch of crazy issues, and I spend a part of an OT shift, instead of running traffic. I was talking to my mom trying to, get her out of the situation. I didn't realize I could have just left and gone home. I screwed up. I fessed up to it. I was like, hey, look, I'll, if you want to pay me at straight time or not pay me any overtime, whatever, I'm fine with that. I was dealing with something personal. I didn't get
Right.
into it because, we're a union department, and our union rep was like, well, just don't tell them that because then they're going to think you're making excuses. So I didn't tell them about the stuff with my mom. I just ended up going out there, moving her from California to Colorado and letting her live in my basement and, trying to get my mom back on her feet and help
Sure.
her out. Um, and then from, as this is going on, I'm, now dealing with, I've transferred to days because, I was miserable working our traffic section. It's a working day shift, even though I trash talked those day shift guys for, all my rookie years on overnight, you old codgers and wasting time on calls. I learned so much from those old guys during those few years that I was on days with them, before they retired out. Still great friends with a couple of them. One of them passed away due to alcoholism. The law enforcement bug with that and not dealing with trauma that we have. Um, from there, uh, things kind of started to get better. My sleep was now getting better because I'm actually sleeping at night. I'm not having uninterrupted sleep because when I was working overnights, it was brutal. You can never. I mean, we looked like a crackhead house because my wife was working in dispatch overnight. I was working overnight, so we had like aluminum foil on our bedroom windows to block the sunlight out.
Let's touch on that. And that's so interesting because a lot of people don't realize that. But when you work those midnight shifts, and you said something just a bit ago, it's starting to affect your mental health. It's starting to affect how you interact with the citizens you're arresting,
Yep.
and you're dealing with sleep deprivation. You're dealing with all these things.
Yep.
At that point, did you realize this was impacting you, or were you not yet aware of that?
I honestly wasn't aware of it. And so when it came down to me getting involuntarily transferred out of our traffic section, I initially picked our day shift because I did it as a fuck you to the administration, to be honest with you. Because at the time, like I was, one of the highest, guys in the department for DUI arrests and all that other stuff. And I was like, man, if I go back to overnights where I'm at right now, these guys are just going to make me start doing DUIs. Hey, I got a DUI. You want to come over here and run my DUI? No, I don't want to run your DUI. I don't want to deal with drunks again. So I was like, they were like, well, call your wife real quick and find out what you want to do. So I called my wife and I said, I'm really thinking about going to day shift, changing life up, getting my sleep on track again. Because, for years, you sleep with the aluminum foil on the windows. And I was only getting, a couple hours at a time. And then I'd be up for a little bit and then a couple hours again. And then you're up for a little bit, and then overnights are 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. shift. 8 a.m. the courthouse opens, and guess what I've got? I've got a motions hearing on a DUI or
Sure
a
do.
prelim. So you get off at 8 a.m. and now you're stuck in the courthouse when you should be sleeping, and you're trying not to fall asleep in court or anything else because you are just exhausted. Because I've ran my ass off for 10 hours straight dealing with violent crime and all of this other stuff. And it was taking a toll. So thankfully, I think I at least had the foresight to realize I needed to change my sleeping hours. And once I got into that sleep rhythm, things kind of started getting a little bit better. Things were going good. Um, and, I kind of was starting to enjoy what I was doing. Everything was going great. And then, uh, November 10th, 2022 happened. I had my first critical incident in my career, and it really rocked me because it was a suicide by cop, type deal. So that one really bugged me. Uh, and I was like, man, I made it 8.5 years before I ever had something like this happen. And then part of the process with that, I think I screwed up, was the department shrink that we had. I really didn't like that shrink. I didn't mesh with her. She had terrible active listening skills. So like anytime you say anything, she was like, oh, like every time when you talk, and you're like, God, I just want to punch you in the face. So I literally said whatever I needed to do to get cleared to go back to the street and go back to work.
Let's talk about that. That's interesting because I hear a similar thing. I had a similar experience, and
Yeah.
the person that I first talked to was very kind, very compassionate, very kind human being, but just culturally incompetent where
Yeah.
first responders were concerned, but put into a position where she's supposed to help first responders. When you experience that, when somebody's not really listening, when they're not absorbing that, do you think that worsened the situation for you, or did you just shift gears?
I honestly just shift to uh shut them down, shut them out, say whatever I had to say to get out of it. And I was like, screw this. I'm just going to compartmentalize like I've done everything else and just keep pushing forward. And part of it was I don't think I think it was because it was the department shrink. I had to go see her to get cleared to go back to the street. And then, you talk to him initially, through the process, they kind of give you some initial information, like don't drink, don't make it, big decisions or anything like that. They right after the incident, probably later that day, I got that text message, hey, from, I'm so and so from the, department for the, whatever mental health, well, our department shrink. So you get like 3 sleep cycles under your belt, and then, they normally do your formal interview and everything else. And that's a nerve wracking process in itself because you are reliving everything again. But this time, you're basically doing it to explain your life away, because that's how serious that situation is. And then seeing having the department shrink, there were things about the situation that really bothered me, but I didn't feel connected to the shrink, I guess, if that makes sense. She just I think that was one of the things that frustrated me so much was I didn't if she was so annoying, I couldn't talk to her. I guess if that makes sense with those active listening skill deals and the just kind of the way she talked to you, it really bothered me. And it bothered me so much. I was like, I'll just say whatever I have to say to get cleared to go back to work, which I did. I'm okay. Everything's fine. I'm sleeping good. Everything's good. We're good. So we go back to work, and then a year and a week later, I have another one. Totally different circumstances, totally different, thing. Uh, Freaking crazy incident. Um, go through the whole process again, but this time things just didn't feel right. It, again happened in November of 2023 was my second one. And I'm at that point where, I'm doing my stuff. Uh, Kind of initially, I was good initially, I thought, with the second one, with the way that everything went down. And then as time starts to go by, you kind of, the way that our department worked it was you got, after a situation, you come back to work. Initially, they do like 2 weeks in our training division. You kind of help either with the academy or whatever else for 2 weeks. And then you would do 2 weeks with a specialized unit, if you wanted to go to persons crimes or the narcs unit or whatever else, you could go work with those guys for 2 weeks. And then you came back to the street and, you rode paired up with somebody, buddy or whatever for 2 weeks just to kind of make sure that you were okay. And I had already had a previous scheduled vacation. We were going to, in fact, we were going to Jacksonville to go spend time with our son and our youngest son and daughter-in-law who lived down in Jacksonville. And, um, we just get down there, and I told my wife, I was like, babe, I don't think I'm ready to go back. Like, it's something's really starting to bug me. Things are starting to get rough. And I was like, I've been putting off a shoulder surgery and like tennis elbow surgery. I was like, I've been putting those off. I was like, what if I just get those surgeries done, do some light duty time, give me some time, break off the street, away from everything to see how it goes. And she's like, do it, go for it. And I was like, cool. So we schedule the surgeries. We come back from vacation. I'm at work for like a day in our training division, and I have my surgeries and I'm out. So I, recover. And now I'm doing, working up in our property crimes, with those guys, doing some stuff. And, uh, you know, I, I'm really starting to hit a deep depression. Um, I,
If I can,
yeah, go for it.
these two incidents were so close, man.
Hmm.
Just barely a year apart. In that in between, do you feel like you were getting or needed any kind of support from your department? Was there something you weren't getting that you needed, or were you getting everything you needed in that period from the?
I wasn't getting anything from anybody. And I think part of it is because we are terrible as men and we like to self isolate and kind of do a bunch of other self destructive things. And I kind of did that. I compartmentalized and, I just didn't want to talk about it. Um, However, I couldn't go by the area where that first one was because it just, if I went by it, like the instant just knot in your chest. Um, so that threw me for a loop. And then, so as I'm in my start of my deep depression going into it, it was super tough. Because at first I really didn't realize like what was going on. Like I just started to feel like super mopey, and it would be like a day or so. And then it got into like a week. And then it was right before or right after our youngest son came home for his 21st birthday. I hit a wall. Like I was in such deep depression. It was tough. And my wife finally told me, she was like, look, I love you. I don't know what to do. I can't help you, but you need to go talk to somebody. She's like, seriously, go talk to somebody. And I started to think about it. And I was like, maybe I should do something. And I called because I'd kind of done a workman's comp claim after my first incident because I was having a little bit of sleep issues, and they kind of just give me some trazodone to help me sleep. And so I was like, it's all spawning around that initially. Like, let me call them and see if I can open that claim up, and they would pay for therapy or counseling. And I called them and they said that they would. So I was, on the hunt for a therapist at that time or, whatever counselor. Um, it just so happens I get cleared. This is it's May of 2024, first week of May. Um, I'm back on the street. It's my very first day, first call out the gate, right from roll call is to recover a stolen vehicle. And that's similar to what my second one was. Uh, and we get up to get the guy out of the vehicle. He starts reaching for a rifle. We're fighting with people inside the car. And like after we get him under control and cuffed up, like, dude, I shut down. I had a panic attack, anxiety. Like I couldn't get my heart under, my heart rate under control. Box breathing wasn't doing anything. I'm going through the checklist in my head of all these different things I know to calm myself down. And I just can't do it. And it
So,
got,
to be
go
clear,
ahead.
you've got some coping mechanisms, right? Like you've learned some coping
Yeah.
mechanisms
Yeah.
at this point. But it sounds like the weight of all of this, man.
Yeah.
At some point, it just surpasses what your coping mechanisms are able to do.
Yeah.
Did this happen at work? Were you in service at the time?
Oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
at work first day. It's my first day back on the street, full duty, first call, and this is like what happens right after this. So I immediately realize what's going on. I go back to the station. I'm trying to calm down. I talk to my supervisor, explain to him what's going on. Uh, we end up going in to talk to my captain, explaining to him what's going on. Uh, I kind of have the first real um, breakdown in my captain's office,
Mm.
about how bad it's truly getting. And he's like, dude, go start your workman's comp paperwork. We're starting a new workman's comp claim for you. So we do that. Uh, I finally find a therapist. I talk to our peer support folks. I talk to some other folks, and then I get recommended a therapist. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna give her a shout out, and it's Liz Villamarin with Insight Services in Colorado Springs. She is, uh, she was a godsend to me.
Thanks, Liz.
Um, and it's so funny because when you look at Liz, you're like, wow, she kind of looks like one of those girly girls, but she is not a girly girl. Like her dad, she grew up with a crusty old Vietnam vet like I did. I think her dad, if I remember right, was like a tunnel rat. So this, like, she's like, I've got some stories and grew up around this stuff. So I know what you're going through. And then she specializes in first responders. Um, so I, I really struggled in therapy initially. Because I grew up with my dad, in that mentality of you don't let people see you down, you don't let people
Sure.
see you sad, you don't let people see you cry, you don't let people affect you. That was, you know, and I can't fault my dad because he was raised that way and he raised me the best way that he knew how to.
Right.
But that was, what I knew was you just suck it up and you keep moving on. So sitting in my captain's office, it was kind of funny because I've always been a jokester and everything else. And my captain looked at me and he goes, Rich, he goes, kind of remind me of Robin Williams. And I was like, fuck? Like, he's like, you make everybody, you're laughing on the outside, but you're dying on the inside. And I had never felt so accurately labeled, judged, as I did at that time, because that was the way that I felt. Like it was just miserable. And therapy was rough because I didn't know or truly understand emotional intelligence.
Sure.
I didn't understand how you have to get into the emotions and feelings to make therapy work. And that was one of the things that, thankfully Liz kind of got on me during our therapy sessions, where she's like, great, we spent 40 fucking minutes talking about the logical side of it, all both of those things. But she's like, you never truly told me how you felt. And I was like, well, what do you mean how I felt? She's like, well, how, she gets into the emotions of, how you felt at certain times or certain things. And God, once I learned the emotional side of it,
Oh my gosh.
dude, it got so much worse there initially, because now you're actually feeling the complexity of these situations and the weight that it has, was just crazy. Um,
When, if I can, when you're in therapy and you're going through that, I had a similar experience because I was able to recount what I did, what
yeah,
other people did, my actions. Let me tell you
yeah,
what my actions were. Let me tell you what their actions were. How did you feel when? And I'm like, oh my
yeah.
God, and because I really wasn't digging into that. Was therapy a thing where it sounds like you had a very good therapist, and I've
Mhm.
seen situations where a therapist would say, "Just tell me this," but they really don't have any skills for you to build on. Were you able
Yeah.
to build skills for navigating those things in therapy?
So she did a pretty good job of helping me build those skills. And it just started off with, kind of initially, I think the first thing that we talked about was, my first one, the poor kid that was with me on my first one. I mean, it was his very first week on the street by himself. He had just finished our training program. He was on his own for a week when him and I get into the first one. Um, and so for me, kind of being that, the older veteran, they're on the scene, I'm in charge. I'm trying to do everything to help protect him and make sure that he stays safe. And once we started getting into like how I felt, like kind of like that protective deal and wanting to make sure and keep him safe, um, that was when it really started to break down the emotions for me, because then I truly started to get it. But then dude, like learning those emotions made it so much worse for me initially, because it's like I guess the best way to put it would be like, take for example, if you never really felt emotion at all, and then all of a sudden you feel every emotion possible at the same time, and it's just overwhelming on your system. I mean, it was so bad, um, that God, it probably was end of May, beginning of June. Um, I sat down and I recorded a video on my phone to explain to my wife and boys why I was about to do what I was going to do. And dude, I was so miserable. I was in it. Y- Dude, I was in such a deep hole at that time. I thought there was absolutely no way out. And it was rough. It was absolutely miserable. And the worst thing of it is we can talk about that here in a bit, but the fucking brotherhood, man, they are not there. They don't show up because they don't understand mental health. They don't recognize mental health. They don't get it because they don't recognize it. They don't understand it. They haven't put any effort into it. So, on top of being at your absolute worst moment in your life, you have nobody to turn to, because your brothers and sisters, you thought that would be there for you, because my entire career we preach this brotherhood that, if you're down, if you're in need of help, you've got brothers and sisters to call. And those brothers and sisters ghosted me. None
They're
of them,
not there.
they're not there. The very first day that I went out.
Richard, I want to take a second, man. I want to thank you for sharing what you just did, because it takes an extraordinary amount of courage. And if I've been in the place you're talking about, we know each other's stories a bit, but it can be so difficult for people to understand and try to make sense of what a suicidal person is going through.
Yeah.
But when we are suicidal, when we are at that point, and no other solutions are working, it feels untenable, and
No.
it feels like maybe the only thing we can control.
And
And it's so important that people like you say that so that we can understand what
Yeah.
those moments are like. Thank you for
and
sharing that.
and thankfully, despite hating religion for, I don't know, my entire life pretty much, um, there was some divine intervention that happened for me on that day, because whatever my wife and I had been texting, I mean, our boys are out of the house. We're empty nesters. Um, and we've been empty nesters for a few years now, but whatever it was, text conversation between my wife and I, however it was, I was responding to her. Um, Thankfully, after I had recorded the video and everything, I was getting ready to leave the house, and I was downstairs in our, I was had everything ready to go, getting ready to walk out the house, and I hear the front door open, and it's my wife, and it's, early. It's, not 5 o'clock, 5:30, it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And she's like, I don't know what's going on with you today, but I am not leaving you alone. And I was like, I mean, she was like, if you're going somewhere, I'm going with you. I mean, she was stuck to me like glue. And God, thankfully, I have, my wife and I will have been together for 29 years this year, towards the end of the like November-ish. We've been married, well, not that long, but we've been together for 29 years. And I've known her since she was 14 and I was 16. Um, and she is just, we'll get into that too. But yeah, I'm here on that because of her, because she wouldn't leave me alone.
Man,
Uh,
I gotta tell you, I was asked recently on a podcast, who knew you were going through this? And I said, nobody, like at work is what I meant. My wife was the one to see this and go, I think you need to get out.
Hmm.
I think you need to move away from this, or I don't think you're going to make it. It's extraordinary to have somebody be able to see that and act on your behalf and speak up on your behalf. I'm
Yeah,
glad you had that.
and well, now we're going to admit to my dumbassery because my wife had been telling me for years to get out of law enforcement. Um, when we both started, my wife worked at our department a little bit prior to my starting because she was a 911 dispatcher and then, worked up to a dispatch supervisor. Um, God, I was so dumb, oblivious, and blind to, what we go through as first responders. And for the longest time, I was like, you're a dispatcher? Like, you just answer the phone. What do you truly go through? Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's how oblivious I was to everything at that time in that circumstance. I was completely oblivious to it.
Mm.
Um, you know, uh, and then, I mean, my wife she had some stuff that had affected her and bothered her being a supervisor, and a dispatcher and hearing some of the things that they hear and things that happen. And she's also been on several critical incidents, had them happen on her channel. Like she gets it. And, um, I think thankfully that was one of the things I recognized with her, at least, she started to realize it was bothering her working up there. And she ended up transferring to another, within the city over to the fire department. But she loves it over there because she runs their budget and payroll now. She's
Right.
chilling out. And she does a little bit of OT every now and then for 911 up in the dispatch center if they need help or stuff. But, you know, she doesn't do that anymore. Um, but dude, I was so dumb and oblivious to, everything that, I was going on. I was one of those guys that I was like, being a cop isn't my personality. It's not my persona,
Hmm.
until you don't have it. And then you're like,
Oh,
wow,
wait.
like that was who I was. That's who I identified as. But back to kind of where I was in my deal. So the first day that I go out on injury leave, for my mental health stuff, I go to Workman's Comp, and Workman's Comp's like, you need a mental health evaluation. And I was like, I'm telling you right now, like I'm at that point where like I hadn't truly thought about ending it, but I was at that point where you're like, I just don't want to wake up tomorrow.
You're right.
If I didn't wake up tomorrow, all of my problems would be gone. And that was what I wanted. And that's what I told them. I was like, look, this is where I'm at. And they're like, you need a mental health eval. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll go drive. They're like, well, you have to go to the hospital here. I was like, I know all the suckers at the hospital here, and I wouldn't go to the hospital here for a mental health eval because I've taken in some batshit crazy people and watched them kick them out the door in like less than an hour. So
Yeah.
no. And then, so then they threatened me. They were like, well, we'll force you. And I was like, good fucking luck, because that's called kidnapping in Colorado. Because the way that, our stuff here works is you have to like, it's basically like probable cause. Like you have to lay out your plan, your method. Like I have to have all that stuff before I can do, what we call mental health hold or 72-hour hold here in Colorado, like 5150 in Colorado or whatever else
Hmm.
other states. Um, so they were like, we'll force you. And I was like, you can't. And I was like, I'll go do it voluntarily, but I'm not doing it here. So I called the peer support lead doctor or whatever. And I was like, where can I go get one of these done? So she hooked it up. Drove up to Colorado Springs. I get there, it honestly was like 5 minutes and I was back in the room, but they immediately, made me do the urine sample. They couldn't get their PBT to work. And I was like, I'm not a big drinker. Do you want me to like fix the PBT for you and blow it? Like, I'll do it for you to show you I'm not drinking. And then they put you in the turtle suit. But I was at the time was a little bit bigger because I was in my depression and I was probably, I don't know, 360, 370 pounds. I mean, I've always been a big guy. Not that big, but depression and everything, you just get
Oh, yeah.
miserable. So I am in like a half-ass turtle suit because they don't make pants big enough. And it wasn't like big pants. And they ended up just putting me in like a turtle suit top. So they take my truck keys, they take my wallet, they take everything else. I brought a book with me because I was like, I'm probably going to be here for a bit. So I might as well read. They left my phone. So thankfully, one of my friends who I had worked with at the department and left so he could go home and be like a stay at home dad, and a couple other guys that I worked with reached out to me. Um, but after I end up leaving the hospital, because there's nothing they can do for me, they basically sent me to the hospital because Workman's Comp didn't want to prescribe any medications to me. They wanted me to go to the doctor and get it, even though they're doctors.
Right.
So the ER doc's like, dude, I'm not giving you any medication. I'm not going to see you. That's something that they have to do, which also kind of went into my problem because I couldn't get in to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist to get meds prescribed for like 3 months. So I'm raw dogging all of these emotions. Everything is just miserable and
Mm-hmm.
terrible. But that first day, a coworker texted me, asked me if I was on injury leave. I didn't respond to this coworker because I'm not a fan of him. He tracked down my wife, where she worked within the city, and asked her to ask me if I could give up my day shift spot to him so he could have it. And I was like, right.
The brotherhood.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't respond to him, and then like a week later, another one of the guys I called with was like, "Well, I heard you ain't coming back to work. Do you think I could have your Christmas vacation pick so my girlfriend and I can have the same time off together?" And I was like, "Fuck you, dude! Like, leave me alone." And I was on our e-board for our union because we're a union department, and like our union president was like, well, if you're not going to show up to meetings, like we're going to have to kick you off the board. I was like, fuck you, kick me off the board then. Like,
Mm-hmm.
get somebody else. Like, nobody put any time or effort into like actually checking to see if I was okay. Nobody from the peer support team reached out to make sure I was okay. I was on my own, and that was the worst part of it.
You know, man, I've heard that echoed by so many people, myself included. Like, people knew I wasn't okay. They could
Yeah.
tell my performance was changing, my attitude was changing, my disposition toward the job was changing. There was some frustration with me, but there was no, "Are you okay? You know, what
Yeah.
can we do for you?"
Yeah.
That just didn't come. It's
Nope.
difficult to imagine in a
Yeah.
profession where you're supposed to have a brotherhood that they're just not thinking that way.
Yeah. I mean, and that was just it. So I go through, all my stuff. It's September 27th of 2024, and I'll always remember that date because it was the date I about ready to do it a second time. Um, my best friend called me. It was my best friend from the Navy. I'm his kid's godfather. He, I mean, we talked, but like we didn't talk often, and it was out of the blue for him to call me that day. And normally, if he calls, I answer. And man, I don't know why I answered in the depths of hell that I was in at that time, but I did. And second time, divine intervention. And he calls me, and my last name's Burns, and he's like, "Burns." He goes, "I'm dying." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "I've got cancer and they told me I have 2 months to live." And I was like, "What the hell, man?" Like, so, I would go out, a couple weekends at a time whenever I could get away, between therapy and everything else that I was doing to go spend some time with him and his family. And man, I got to share some just amazing private moments with him and his, family. And it changed so much for me
Mm-hmm.
at that time because, here it is. I was like, I'm so miserable. Life is, terrible. And here it is. My best friend is just a few years older than me. He's in his late 40s, and I'm literally watching him die. I mean, like, this dude was a badass. And here it is, I'm helping him get up to go to the bathroom, and I'm emptying his pee bottles and doing all these things to help my friend out. And, you know, uh, a couple times at the hospital, I had to pick him up and help get him into the bathroom so he could shower and do all these other things because it was a tough time. But it was such an eye opener for me because I was like, man, I am just, how can I be so miserable when I'm literally watching my best friend die in front of me? Um, and, my wife and I had talked about it, because I knew it was really, really going to bug me when he passed. Um, and it just so happened it was March 12th. He's been gone a year now. Um, but God, when he died, man, I cried for 3 days straight. Like I bawled like a baby. Like it just sucked and it hurt. And it was so funny because by about that third day, I heard my best friend's voice in my head. He, tell me, stop being a fucking bitch, quit crying. And then after that, I was fine. Um, I did some things, with him. Like I recorded, those dad books. I really wanted to make sure that his kids got those dad books.
Wow. That's
Because, for me, losing my dad, I was like, man, like just to have a piece of him or something, so I have a like hour long voice recording of my buddy and me going through and asking him all of those questions. And, I mean, I still struggle right now because I've tried to start that project so many times to get it done for, his kids. And every time I hear his voice, I cry. Uh, so I think one of these days it'll get better and I'll be able to do it. But it was one of those things that it woke me up. And then, I started to get miserable about, everything that was happening. Uh, and I, it got to the point where, as my workman's comp claim, because you only get a year,
Yeah.
and then I guess I went out later than I could have. I should have gone out like immediately right after my second one, so I missed a few months. So now, I'm in this process of, either I'm coming back to work or looking at doing something else. Uh, and I'm talking to my therapist and my psychiatrist, and the consensus is if I go back to work, what's the odds I'm going to have another critical incident? And the odds are pretty damn good in this
Pretty
city
good.
because I work with guys that, I mean, I've had multiple. There are several other guys that I work with that have had multiples. There's guys that I work with that, they've had 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. So the chances of me getting into another one are pretty damn good. Uh, so now we look at, what do you want to do? Do you want to get out of this? Do you want to stay in it? Um, and the longer we talk about it, the doctor and, Liz, my therapist, were like, probably just hang it up and see if you can medically retire.
Yeah.
And then talking to Workman's Comp, Workman's Comp's like, the recommendation we're going to make is that you are medically retired. And I was like, okay, let's start that process. And so you have to go through the max medical improvement, stuff for Workman's Comp and go through that process. And then I had to do like let me see if I can pull it out here real quick. Because I've got it here. Get this packet out. See if I can get this up here without making too much of a mess. That, I don't know if I can do that through there, is my retirement packet.
Very nice. Very
That
nice.
is what I have to submit just to medically retire. That is all of my doctor's appointments, medical appointments, prescriptions. I mean, and I had to scan all of that information in, and then I had to send it into, we have our program through Fire Police Protective Association. It's run like through Fidelity. Here in Colorado, I had to send that all to them. And then I had to meet with three independent shrinks through them, and then go through that process. All the shrinks made the recommendation that I should be medically retired. Dude, February 28th of 2025, I got the phone call saying that the board had approved my medical retirement. So thankfully, I've been medically retired now for a year, and I just in this year alone, like, so much has changed for me. I think I honestly started doing first, and I guess I don't know how you felt when you initially got out. There's like phases we go through. Um, because when you first get out, you're like stuck in that trauma phase where all you want to do is talk about the shitty stuff that happened to and I kind of got into that. I was like, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to talk about all this stuff, all the crappy things that we go through, and talk about the mental health side aspect of it. And, I did a few interviews, had some great folks come on, but the problem was I realized not a lot of people really want to share their trauma because, they have to be out of their trauma and healed from their trauma before they can really talk about it. And I
Or
had
it's re-traumatizing, right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
just talking about it just puts you through it again.
Yeah. Or, that happens. And I was like, so, at first, I kind of like it started off, I was like, well, I'm just going to do it as a podcast. And that was kind of how I would, initially I was like, trying to think of something unique that stuck out, and had friends, making suggestions on, what I should call my podcast. And I was like, I'm broken. I'm always going to be broken. I mean, it's not going to define who I am, but what if we did the broken responder? And I was like, that's kind of cool. It kind of stuck out, and I was looking to see, other people's, names that they were using. And you had guys that, were like, yeah, the guys that like the two cops, one donut, stuff like that. And I was like, I like it how it's unique, but I want to do something that's just completely different from everybody else. And then I think I'd use like Chat GPT to, create my logo and everything else and change some things up. And then from there, started doing some podcasts, interviewed some great folks, and then to like trying to get people to come on to do podcasts. You'd have people that, yeah, I'll do it. And then they, you try to follow up with them and they're like, well, I can't do it, or I'm not available, or they just like ghost you altogether. And I was like, you know what? Okay. So then I took a break off for a bit from trying to do the podcast stuff. And I was like, and then, I mean, I'd always watched TikTok, but I'd like never been, um, I guess, had the desire to post a video or create a video. And some of it was I didn't even know how to create or do videos or any of that stuff. So I was like, well, I might as well try. So I think in June or July of like last summer, I kind of started popping up a few, posting a few videos, talking about things. And, at first it was, maybe get some folks to do the podcast. Um, and then, we were still dealing with stuff. I was still angry about the way that I got treated, the whole family deal with the department. Because when I got medically retired, I, uh, I went in to go turn in all of my stuff. And the first time I went to go do it, I was kind of a jerk. Well, it started off with a deputy chief that was a jerk. Because I walked up to the third floor where we have, all the admin offices, and I walk in and there's one of the deputy chiefs that's standing there. And he's like, how's your wife doing? I was like, I haven't been to work in 9 fucking months. And that's the first thing you want to know is how my wife's doing. And he's like, well, we knew how you were doing. And I said, did you? Because I didn't get a phone call from any of you motherfuckers. And, it just started a bad day from there. I wasn't in a good mood. I was turning in all my equipment, picking it, getting everything out of my locker, taking in trash bags, taking all the stuff that I had, uniforms, everything, home to go through later. And the day I went in to go get my stuff, return everything in, one of the secretaries up there was like, "Hey, we have a plaque for you." And I was like, "Oh, well, maybe the chief's gonna give me a plaque." Dude, I walk in and the secretary hands me the plaque, my retirement plaque. The chief won't even come out of his office, can't even take the 2 minutes to come out, and I honestly don't care. And by this time, uh, I'm retired, and I have started to consume some plant-based items that they don't like. And it's kind of funny because, we can't do anything for you and you're terrible because you're doing that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, well, you guys still have alcoholics on the department that you qualify all the time. So I don't want to hear anything from you. And honestly, after that, like, I was like, you know what, screw these guys. I'm not going to, talk to them or do anything. So I just kind of ignored everything. And then, months and months went by and none of them had reached out still, none of that stuff. And I told my wife, I was sitting there one day and I just started going through my phone and I just started deleting everybody out of my phone from work and stuff. Like, if you haven't talked to me or, anything, through this process, or you were a jerk to me, screw you, delete them out of my phone. So I just started deleting a bunch of them. And my wife was like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm absolutely positive I want to delete these guys out of my phone. If you weren't good enough to be there for me during my struggles, you're not good enough to see me on the rise. So you gone." Um, and that's what I did. I just started deleting everybody. And, my wife and I were talking, and, she was like, "You do realize they're all going through their own trauma also." And I was like, "Mother, yeah, they are." So, I quit being so angry at them for that reason, but I'm still disappointed because basic human decency, there was none of it. Um, so I've kind of, given them that little bit of grace. And, now I was sitting there and, talking to, other friends, and it kind of just hit me one day. I was like, that's it. I get it. I understand it now. And my wife was like, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, you think about it." I said, "If you get hurt at work, you get shot at work, you get in the hospital, or heaven forbid you die, the Brotherhood knows how to handle that. They know how to go to the hospital and do details and, have somebody sitting with you or
Right.
protecting your casket or whatever. We know how to do that.
We
We
got that
don't
part.
know how to deal with mental health because those shitty situations, somebody getting shot at work or, heaven forbid dying, those are our traumas. And
Man,
we
I
don't
want
know.
to. I wonder if you're so right about this. I want to take us back a little bit. You were
Yeah.
talking about your best friend.
Yeah.
The hell of a loss, man, to
It
go
was.
through. But your best friend had cancer,
Hmm.
and he's dying, and we
Yeah.
can wrap our heads around that.
Yep.
But you had a mental health disorder, and you were dying. You were so close to
Hmm.
dying by suicide, and nobody, nobody shows up. So
Yep.
you said too, if you get shot, they know how to help you. But
Yeah.
you tell them I'm in a mental health crisis, and you get ignored by your chief
Yep.
when you retire. The way we treat the two things,
Hmm.
I think, speaks to your wife was quite correct. Everybody's going through their own trauma,
Yep.
but also we know how to deal with physical trauma in a way that we don't understand emotional pain. And I think we've got to get to that point where we can do it. And I would love to understand from your perspective, once you're out, what are the things that really started to help you get on that path to healing?
Oh, man. Part of it was just learning to live again. I mean, because for so long, and like for my department, we were very fast paced. I mean, adrenaline dumps daily, cortisol dumps daily. I mean, chases, all the crazy things that you can think of. And I suffered, I think at first the hardest because I didn't have those daily adrenaline dumps and cortisol dumps and dopamine, I didn't have it at all. So you feel like a junkie because it's like coming off of something because you don't get that fix anymore. You're not getting the adrenaline and dopamine, and learning how to deal with that. And then finally kind of getting stabilized at least enough off that. Part of the problem was too was uh, I also struggled a bunch because of med changes. I mean, dude, we went from, like Zoloft and all those things, because that was rough because some of those meds, like you spend 8 hours in the bathroom. I mean, I spent more of my daytime in the bathroom because of the antidepressants. And then finally, you know, we go from antidepressant to another one that does the same thing, and there's that routine. And finally, we've got my meds pretty much balanced day and nighttime, so I sleep okay. Um, Part of that was just learning to discover yourself, like who you are outside of the uniform. Now that I'm no longer Richard Burns, the police officer, I'm Richard Burns, the medically retired police officer. Like, who am I? I'm not a cop anymore, and so one of those things, I was like, I had kind of started to grow my hair out a little bit, as I was, getting towards the end there, just kind of changing something up. And then as I got out, I was like, fuck, I'm gonna grow a mullet. I'm gonna do something different. Because for 40 years, I've had high and tight, I mean, I've always had short hair, professional, every week or every other week, I've got my hair cut. And now I'm like, fuck it, who cares? Like, what am I? Why? Why does it matter? Um, so at first, growing the hair out, doing the facial hair, growing the beard, I was like, man, this is kind of nice. Um, and then just learning at first, I had a kind of like a little personal health scare in November happen. Um, and it kind of really shook me. I was like, man, I really need to start looking out for myself better. And I was going to the gym, but I wasn't, I was going off and on because, the gym was in town and I got to drive 15 minutes, to go to the gym, well, actually like 20 minutes, whatever. And then I just I struggled with a bunch of things. And so at the beginning of this year, I was like, I need to make a plan. I need to make a better plan. And I was like, I got to set it up in, little, sections. I'm going to do this by this, time. And then towards the end of the year, this is my big goal. Uh, and so retirement has just been going to the gym now. I had a buddy of mine, set up a workout routine for me 3 days a week. I go 5 days now. And, Monday, Wednesday, Friday is a cardio and weight routine. And then Tuesday, Thursday is basically just cardio. But retirement is amazing, finally. I mean, and that was one of those other things you look at, they always talk about guys retire and they're dead before they collect their first paycheck,
Absolutely.
or, all of those other things. And I was like, I can't let that happen. I can't let that happen. I've got to do something to fix, what it is that's bugging me and make sure that, I'm not just miserable. Uh, and so I started doing daily TikToks. Uh, Mainly at first, I was like, oh, I'll talk about, some of the things law enforcement related and, hot topics. And I was like, there's enough people on here on the app talking about, what cops go through. There's cops that talk about it. There's all this other stuff, but we don't really have a bunch of people talking about the mental health issues that we face. And that's like a whole other aspect I can get into. Um, because I realized so many things are connected to mental health in first responder community. Um, I mean, like, I was like, man, I didn't realize how fucked up my mental health was way back then. Cause I was like, man, all these times I was disgruntled and angry, or that person's disgruntled and angry, look at I mean, look at all the stuff that we go through on a daily basis and think about how much negativity there is. I mean, nobody calls the cops because they win a spelling bee or their kid got an award.
It's never good. It's
you
never good.
know, my, you know, kid got shot or they were in an accident, or you have to hear some mother's death curdling scream because you are delivering a death notification. I mean, there's all these you're just surrounded by negativity and misery. There's really not much positivity. And then on top of it, you have to, pass a psychological exam to get hired, but we never do anything to take care of the mental health after that. I mean, we
No.
hold you accountable for your actions, and you're supposed to be a consummate professional and never make mistakes, but we take the human aspect out of this.
And we do that. Like on the way in, they do a psychological test because they want to make sure you're not a liability to them. On the way out, they don't care anymore.
Yeah,
You're,
we
you
don't.
know, if you're not a liability, they're not checking on you on the way out because you're not
Yeah,
their problem anymore.
right.
So
And
you're
that's
kind of
just it.
there.
We don't do anything to truly protect the mental health of our first responders. We expect you to be sane when we hire you, but once you're in the gate, I mean, we don't do anything. We're only there to hammer you if you get out of line or you get in trouble. We're not there to make sure that you continue producing for us and, your mental health is okay. And I think that's where, uh, I am trying to learn and understand things because, like, when we first met and started talking, I can't remember if you found me or I found you on TikTok. Um, but learning and understanding and meeting all these different creators on there and their different perspectives, and I think I'm probably the only one that's ever truly talked about this. The fact that everybody's dealing with trauma. We're all dealing with it. I mean, think about how, everybody portrays their Christmas card as we're an amazing picture perfect family. And behind the scenes, like you want to choke the shit out of everybody in that photo. I mean, but that's just it. We portray that we have everything in line and we don't. Um, and I think that's the problem. So I started to think about really how I can try to make an impact and a change. And what could I do? Because there's some of these guys that, I mean, like I still teach officer survival. I teach it at our local community college once a semester. It's 8-hour course. I kind of started teaching it when I worked at our department before I got into my incidents. I don't really do much. I don't teach it for our department anymore for their in-house academy because they don't want to pay me. I didn't even ask to get paid. They just don't want me there. But I teach it at our local community college for their law enforcement academy. And dude, I have the reviews I get from that class are absolutely amazing. The kids love it. They, come in and talk to them and I give them the truth. I don't hold any punches. I don't hide the, terrible things about the career. I'm like, let's talk about it, let's explain it, and let's help you guys not make the same mistake I did.
I think that's an important step, man, because you and I have talked about this a little bit before, but if we can prehabilitate
Hmm.
people going into the field, if we can tell them, hey, the trauma is coming,
Right.
it is part of the job. Don't suck it up. Talk about it. And here are the mechanisms in place for that. I think if we can kind of prehabilitate them for that, I think
Yeah.
they're going to have a better time recovering.
And I think part of the problem is, and here's where I'm going, where I'm trying to, I guess, do something, or I would like to see something done. Um, I would like to see a national mental health initiative for first responders. And honestly, what I would like to see done is, you know, we the lag time between an incident happening and getting an officer in, or another, for any first responder after a critical incident, the lag time to get them in, to really get them going to see a counselor or a therapist or a psychiatrist, is terrible. And
Terrible.
I want to alleviate that, because the longer we put that window out, the more harm that we're doing to somebody. And here's where, I had my buddy who's also a sergeant at my old agency. Like, we were having this discussion, and I love it because he makes me think, but he irritates the shit out of me some days when he makes me think. Because we talked about, what I want to see is a national mental health initiative. I want to figure out a way to, based on like an agency size, like you look at LAPD and, in New York, and those guys who have shrinks on hand
Right.
for those guys all the time. Well, why don't the rest of our agencies have that? why don't we have it, or small town agency where a community or a area is pooled together, and they have so many therapists assigned to them, first responder friendly therapists that know how to deal with the issues we face, know how to talk to us, and if something happens, that person immediately or within, shortly thereafter can go right into that person, the therapist at the department, and start hashing that out. Why aren't we doing that? And I know there's going to be those folks that are like, oh, well, they're just going to use it against us. All right, well, then don't. I
Sure.
mean, I mean, it's not like we're trying to have these folks use it against you. We're trying to get you better so you can go back out on the street, not be an asshole to people, not make stupid mistakes because you're upset, you're angry, you're all these other things. If we start and nip the mental health in the butt, I think you get rid of a bunch of these other issues that we're seeing headlines on and all these other things. Cops making dumb mistakes or doing stupid things. I mean, think about all the people that you worked with that had, shitty attitudes. What trauma did they go through in their career to
Right.
make them that way? You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
if
You
we,
touched you touched on this a bit ago, but it's we often say mental health as if it is separate from physical, as if there are two different things,
yeah,
right? But they're inextricable. Our
yeah,
depression leads to weight gain. Our anxiety leads to frustration and a bad attitude. Our
yep,
post-traumatic stress leads to kind of an overall disassociation and isolating from the society we intend to serve. So I
yeah,
think these two things, heart attacks, my gosh,
yeah,
you,
oh
you
yeah,
know, when you're asleep and your heart rate is 100 beats a minute, or when you're sitting there watching a television show and your heart rate's it's elevated,
yep.
that's going to wear you down.
Yep.
Our
Well, and look at type 2 diabetes. It's called
Yeah,
the cop's
yeah,
disease for a reason because
yeah,
we eat like garbage.
absolutely. Our time's coming to a close, but I want to understand before we go, and we're going to keep talking as we go
Sure.
forward, but I want to understand what you think that people can do. And I love the idea of a national mental health initiative. And I wonder if that is best handled inside or outside the agency, to be separate from the agency or part of it. But I wonder if there were a thing, one or two things you could highlight that you would like to see done differently in the very near future for first responders. What would those one or two things be?
The two things, and I think we're going to face an uphill battle because one, we have to change the culture of the first responder community completely. And it's not so much in changing it to make it touchy feely. It's You can still be a man and have emotions, or you can still be a tough guy and have emotions. Um, but you also need to understand how to deal with the crappy things we see and understand it and be able to process it and deal with it because we don't do a very good job with that. So changing the culture to accept mental health, because I mean, right now, mental health is only like discussed in small circles and rumors, and we acknowledge it. It's like the stepchild, we acknowledge it every now and then when, they have to because something happens, but then after that, it, gets kicked back to the closet. So changing the culture. And then the other thing I think that's also super important with the mental health initiative, getting folks to, with that culture, because I was the same type, you have folks that, hey man, that really bothered me. Man, don't be a bitch. Don't be a pussy. Stop being, we need to change that part with the culture. But truly getting folks to understand that the mental health stuff affects so much negativity and the bad press and everything else that law enforcement and the or first responder community gets. If you can change that stuff, man, I think there's so many things that we can do, because like I'm at that point now where like I'm finally happy. Like I'm happy, I'm losing weight, I'm doing all these other things, and if we can just get folks to understand that and get uh, the mental health, and I would say it's a mental health crisis in the first responder community. It's terrible. If we can work on those things, dude, I think we can improve so much. But it's getting those old, the old salts to, you know, learn to open up and talk about the stuff that they've gone through to, you know, not end up like some of us now that aren't in it anymore.
I agree with you completely. We've got to have that cultural change, and we've got to change the perception of the stigma.
Yeah.
And Richard, I want to thank you for starting the Broken Responder. When I started watching your videos, I thought, awesome, there is somebody else in this space
Right.
who's talking about this, and I love that. I want to chat more as we go on. I really maybe even have you back on the show if we can talk more about that mental health initiative in other seasons. But for now, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed having you. If you'll hang tight afterward, I'll chat with you a bit. But man, it's been a really good conversation, a lot of learning, and I really appreciate you being on with us.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.